I've wanted to talk about this for a long while, but it's only been pertaining to recently with Sky Jackson that I find that we're in a particular situation where I feel like I can speak candidly about this without just coming off as trying to be forgiving, we'll call it. For those of you who may not be aware, Skai Jackson is a Disney actress or former actress, I'm not exactly sure, who is currently using her time, and she is 21 at the time of me recording this. She is using her platform on Twitter to expose racist. I won't even pretend and beat around the bush in saying that these are very blatantly racist things that she is pointing out. I can't disagree with that fundamentally because it is true. But the demographics that are being chosen here appear to be predominantly 18 and under individuals. And so I've had many problems and conversations and questions that I just have to elaborate from here. And now part of Bad Manners is me talking just kind of more candidly, and then I will get my opinions out towards the end. And if you are listening on YouTube with a video feed, I'll try to have some markers made in the middle of the video so that way you can kind of distinguish when I'm going on just talking fact or story based, and then when I'm just kind of going off of my own opinion. I find that canceling somebody is a menial task that has no impact. It is the equivalent of a modern day quote-unquote boycott that just only ever takes activism as a pretense to morally virtue signal. It is not an actual attempt to do damage or actually change anything. It's just to signal to people who agree with you that what you're looking at is bad. But what you're inadvertently doing when you're quote-unquote canceling people is you're entrenching ideology. And I'll get into this when it comes to the Skai Jackson circumstance, but I'll also explain separately on its own caliber what I mean. When you take somebody who is blatantly committing a bad act, morally, not just like an illegal sense, just like a morally bad act, being racist, being sexist, homophobic, whichever that might be, we all can agree that that person is doing a bad moral act. But if you scold or dissuade that person from doing that, you're not offering the opportunity to educate somebody. And this particular instance with Skai Jackson is egregious because the targets are the most vulnerable people and subsequently the worst targets just from a moral perspective. When you take somebody who is engaging in obvious racist or just insulting, offensive behavior for the most part, you are putting them into the spotlight of saying, we are now highlighting your flawed history forever. This is one of the biggest fallacies to the internet that has just kind of escaped the modern culture and the modern youth. Of going, anything you post online is there forever. And with an increase of technology and the use of social media websites, your public profile is that, public. So when you exist now and somebody decides to research who you are as a character, your public profile is what has been put up. And unlike in many generations past, other people did not know your past because the only people who could publish your past were newspaper and media sources of that nature, radio and television. But because you've voluntarily surrendered that information and other people have voluntarily consumed that information, you now offer your private life up to a sacrifice in the future. And I particularly bring this up because children should not be held to the same standards. In fact, I'm going to go as so far as to say even Skai Jackson shouldn't be held to the same standards of the criticism that I'm going to levy. Because in my opinion, Skai Jackson is still in the mindset of a young child. Not necessarily saying she is. She's a 21-year-old adult, fully respectable adult. But you haven't had enough time and life experience to fully understand and develop what damages could be done to the most vulnerable demographics here. And obvious legal complaints aside that you could be considering this incitement to harass or cause violence, or because doxing for the most part is very, very risky and it tends to also coincide with incitement to harass or assault somebody, you are skirting a line of not only legal trouble but socio trouble. When you cause somebody to hate the people that would criticize their ideology instead of trying to inform them or change them or educate them, what you're doing is you're causing somebody to put up a barrier that then makes them unwilling to learn from different opinions or ideologies. So to go to somebody and say, you're a bad person and we are going to get you fired from your job, kicked out of your school, or shunned by your community, or shunned by their community, you've now entrenched their ideology of hatred and said, well, I spread something that I thought was silly and playful in many cases, and now people have legitimately attacked me. Well, I'm going to go to the communities that support my ideology. And this is how you tend to breed legitimate racist and white supremacy culture, is because you entrench people instead of trying to educate them. And the last particular point that I want to leave off on is that Skai Jackson is doing one awful thing that I do not feel is being mentioned enough, which is that it is creating a culture of snitching and lying. Because snitching, for the most part, is not necessarily bad. I do have a problem is what tends to follow from that culture. And what follows from that culture tends to be the idea of forced snitching. The idea that if you're not being forced to speak out against insert whatever action is deemed morally wrong, then you are also at risk of being quote-unquote canceled, or whatever incitement or action could be taken against you because you are not doing it on your own volition. I always try to emphasize by saying, if you want to speak out, you want to be politically involved, you should. You should always do it. It is insanity to me that people don't do that who are politically involved. You should always try to speak up. But to force somebody else to do it, and nonetheless try to force somebody else into your ideology or belief system, is reprehensible. I have been forced many times in my life personally to be forced into certain ideological beliefs and certain religious beliefs. And I, at the end of my day, rejected all of them because I did not agree with them, because I was scolded, insulted, and attacked for my beliefs or my opinions. The only time I give a bit of a credence to this ideology is when it is your place of employment, we will call it. For example, police officers. I'm a firm believer that if you are witnessing injustices, you should not then say, oh, well, I need to keep my job and protect my neck because I am that worried about the consequences of speaking the truth. If you work in an office environment and you actively know they are discriminating against minorities or underprivileged communities, then you have an obligation, in my opinion, to speak up. But that does not mean when you go to your private life, you have to do the same. In the culture and the environment that you work in, that you have an impact on how the business or society, for the most part, has an actual impact. For example, working at a soup kitchen, I would never subscribe to the idea that you're allowed to allow racist behaviors to occur in a charity situation. You have a duty there to do what you can to stand up for what's right. But I cannot be compelled to, quote unquote, call out racist because so-and-so says that needs to be the truth. And it does not matter what the truth is, it is not your obligation to compel other people to do it. Now I want to get into some opinions here, and as I try to say, I try to go very factual, straightforward with my points, and then from this point on, I am going to go entirely opinion-based. And if you have any concerns or comments, or you want to debate me on this topic, please leave a comment down below and try to hit me up on Twitter. I am open to having any person on this show talk to me. I don't care who you are, just as long as you have a working microphone, I am willing to have my mind changed on these ideas. But I'm going to say blatantly now, because we're in opinion section, Skai is a cunt. I have no remorse in saying those words. Skai Jackson, you are a legitimate cunt. If we were to take a microscope to any person's life, at any moment they made a single mistake or multiple mistakes of the same caliber, do we really want to live in that society where we have this morality test that needs to be what dictates who is a quote-unquote good person? No. No person would sanely agree to that, and if you do, you must not have lived enough life yet. For example, like I mentioned earlier, I do not firmly believe that I was a quote-unquote fully grown adult until I was solidly 23 to 25 years old. And it was because I worked in jobs and I actually had to fight just to make my paycheck. I had to actually be around legitimate racists. I had to live in hostile environments. I had to live in a household of people who were creatively soul-crushing, we will call it. And that, for the most part, led me to becoming a decent adult, because I gathered other people's perspectives and upbringings, and I understood how to find the points that I wanted to contest or agree with. And like I said at the beginning, there is no part of me that can blatantly sit there and say, well, no, these kids aren't legitimately being racist. No, they are being racist. Does that mean they are racist? No. And that's the problem right there with this whole ordeal, is that a flash in the pan moment is now forever staining people's lives. And to the most part, she's getting it wrong in some instances too, using the wrong people, and other people are also lying to Skai. They are photoshopping messages as well because they have disagreements or hatred towards other people. So you lie to get platformed by a public person, your lie. So when you try to arbitrate the truth, you just tend to spread lies. Here's an adage that I hope will give you a little bit of context, is that my entire upbringing was that I didn't see color. I lived in poor communities. I was exposed to many different peoples and different cultures. I went to school with people with many international transfer students. I had many friends of different cultures and orientations. I was raised in an instance to not see color. What I did see, though, was isolated incidents of minor racism or blatant racism by people that I was in surroundings with or schools with or work environments with. And to simply put, if I had sat there and listened to what they said and done something heinous like some of these kids do, which is go on TikTok and dance in blackface or something akin to that, and then I had people attacking me because I thought I was doing what was a joke, because when I hear it from other people, that tends to be used as a joke. But as an adult, I had the wherewithal to go, hey, what these people are saying is a joke, and the people who have continually used racist jokes repetitively, I have a conversation with them. I have that conversation. I say, hey, we cool? What's going on here? Like, I tend to put people on blast. But the thing is that I don't sit there and go, hey, excuse me, I have to now go to my boss to report you for this racist incident, because all I've done now is spread more anger and hatred. And it doesn't matter the ideology is bad. We all agree the ideology is bad. But when presented the opportunity, I would talk to these people about my other friends and my experiences in life, and being like, no, I don't know why you're saying that about insert protected class here, because I've met many people who were gay and fantastic people. I know this is a crazy ideology, but most racism is, in my opinion, I am not going to quote something and say that it's a fact. I'm going to bring up my opinion here and say that racism tends to occur in two circumstances. And this is not color specific to any racist group. Racism is from upbringing and culture, as far as I can see. If you live in a household of people who say, don't trust white people because our entire family's been screwed over by white people, well, at the end of the day, that is still racism. But you can understand where a person's perspective comes. But their upbringing is always going to be entrenched in racist ideology. You should try to help people go, well, you know, it's not all insert whatever people. You should try to exemplify a nature of going, hey, what you've been taught is wrong, but I want to do what I can to not shatter your existence. I don't want you to fight your family and your upbringing because now I've opened your eyes to something else. Think about how many people live in the South and have been living with generations of families that are just told insert blank group that's different from white people is bad. It's a historical context that's just bred itself over and over and over again. But slowly but surely we see these communities gentrifying more, having more people use the land to expand and trying to actually develop better cultures and societies. Slowly but surely, the quote-unquote the South will rise up people will be gone, because slowly but surely you're educating them. You have these parents who try to instill ideologies to people, and then they go meet their friends outside of this household that is breeding hatred, and their friends go, hey, that's not what we're really like out here. And subsequently, that also, in my opinion, leads to the other biggest instance of racism, or hatred, or homophobia, or whatever phobia you might want to insert here. It is the uneducated small group. I have a friend, and I try not to name people in this thing, where she was going to a geology research camp, and she was going to go travel at Yellowstone Park, one of the volcanoes, for geology, because they do these retreat camps. And she describes to me some of the most blatant racism from white people that I've ever heard in my life. It's people who are in college and they genuinely are expressing this bad, hateful ideology. But my question comes into play there and going, who is in those groups to check them? When somebody's making very blatantly racist jokes, how many of their other friends are going, hey, why don't we take a second to stop there and maybe we can try to change this before this is a real legitimate problem? These two types of cultures are very hard to weed out. But you don't weed them out by putting people under a microscopic lens and saying, we now have to destroy the rest of your life. I am now a fully grown 28-year-old adult, and if people had taken any moments of my past, regardless if they're good or bad, and putting them down under a microscope, you would have found 10% of who I am now. Sure, there might be some quirky weirdness aspects of my life. Maybe there's some weird implicit biases I have against people. Maybe there's some implicit biases that I love about people. You don't know what they are until you're fully grown. And fully grown is such a vague term that it's difficult to ever sit there and say, well, what is fully grown? Well, according to the law, 18 is fully grown. But who honestly can sit there and say at 18 years old they know how to pay bills and do taxes and buy a house? So few people. Would you call that person a grown person at that point? And the same needs to apply to people who are underage. And the fact that a 21-year-old adult has the audacity to attempt to weaponize people's angers and frustrations with legitimate racism in the system, and I will use that word very loosely here, with something like the George Floyd protests, it is an embarrassment that she's exploiting people's anger to drive personal virtue signaling narratives. And that's what I'm going to say here. As blatant of a statement as that is, it is a virtue signal, because Skai Jackson has had multiple instances of her being targeted because she is inciting possible violence to the people that she's exposing, and she does it without remorse. Meanwhile, if she were to argue with adults and legitimate racist instances like police killing black people at disproportional rates, you would find that she doesn't make those arguments. Because why would you go after the hard target when you can go after the easy target because you're weaponizing people's anger? And Skai Jackson, in no uncertain terms, I do call you a cunt in this circumstance. And I hope for a moment here that you understand when you are going to inevitably be put under a microscope for the next 10 plus years of your life because people do not let go of anger and hatred and revenge, that I hope you don't fuck up. Because I guarantee you will. Because everyone does. And if at no point you can ever truly say you're sorry for something, I fail to see you as ever being considered a person who actually is trying to push any type of positive change or reform. Because all you're doing is weaponizing people's already existing anger to then spread more anger.